My name is Daniel Holtz. I'm a professor at the University of Chicago. I'm also chair of the Science and Security Board of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, and in this role, I help set the doomsday clock. I am also founding director of the University of Chicago Existential Risk Laboratory, or XLab for short. I am a co-organizer of the Nobel Laureate Assembly on the prevention of nuclear war. I would like to welcome everyone in the room, as well as those of you on the live stream. This event represents the culmination of 3 days of very intense discussions and collaboration here at the University of Chicago. And we look forward to sharing the findings of our assembly, as well as commemorating the 80th anniversary of the Trinity Test. It is now my honor to introduce one of my co-organizers, Brian Schmidt. Brian is an astrophysicist at the Australian National University and served as Vice Chancellor from 2016 to 2024. He works on measuring the expansion history of the universe using exploding stars known as supernovae. Along with Saul Perlmutter and Adam Rees, Brian was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2011 for the discovery that the expansion of the universe is accelerating. This remains one of the most shocking discoveries of modern physics, and we are still desperately searching for a deeper understanding of this mysterious dark energy. Brian, please.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here this afternoon. It is great to be back in Chicago. For me, the first time at the University of Chicago, not in winter, to a place that today holds a special place in the history of people such as myself. I study thermonuclear detonations that occur in space, as did, for example, Robert Oppenheimer. So the Trinity Test is a legacy of my area of physics and my academic grandparents. And it's something that me and my colleagues never forget. And being here at the University of Chicago, that played such a role before and after the Trinity Test, I think is especially important here on the 80th anniversary of this event. So we have an event in 2 parts today. The first hour will include some reflections on world events, the need for action to prevent nuclear war, and will include a keynote address on today's anniversary of the first nuclear test. We will then have a short intermission, and we will then finish with a press conference to present the newly completed declaration. And at that, we'll have a chance for questions to be asked from the press of the committee that helped draft and put together this program and the actual declaration, and discuss its meeting and our future steps. Before we go there, though, I would like to start now with a recorded message from Masako Wado, a survivor of the atomic bombing of Nagasaki. She is the Assistant General Secretary of Nihon Hidankyo, an organization of nuclear weapon survivors, which won last year the 2024 Nobel Peace Prize.
The risk of using nuclear weapons have never been higher than it is now. In 2021, after Russia invaded Ukraine, President Putin's remarks hinting at the use of nuclear weapons made us, the atomic bomb survivors, fearful and anxious that the tragedies of Hiroshima and Nagasaki would be repeated. In response to President Putin's remarks, some Japanese national leaders and Diet members spoke of the need for nuclear sharing. If American nuclear weapons were deployed in Japan and the nuclear button under American control were pressed in an emergency, Japan, which calls itself the only country to have suffered atomic bombing in war, would become an aggressor. What is the meaning of the fact that nuclear weapons have not been used until today, 80 years after the atomic bombings. The Japanese government bases its nuclear disarmament policy on the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, NPT, which came into force in 1970. This treaty, which has been ratified by 191 countries, was indefinitely extended in 1995 without playing a significant role in nuclear disarmament. Non-nuclear countries grew frustrated and dissatisfied. As a result, an international conference on the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons was held, and after several years, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, TPNW, was adopted and came into force in 2021. The words in the 1956 founding declaration of the Japan Confederation of A and H Bomb Sufferers Organization, message to the world: we have assured our will to save humanity from its crisis through the lessons learned from our experiences, while at the same time saving ourselves, have finally seen the light of day. This pledge, which may seem exaggerated at first glance, to save humanity from its crisis, has prevented the use of nuclear weapons by the hibakusha telling their own painful thoughts and experiences, saying that they do not want others to experience the same as they did, and by telling the stories of what the use of nuclear weapons would bring. Since then, hibakusha have been working tirelessly to abolish nuclear weapons without a single day of rest. And in 2024, Nihon Hidankyo received a Nobel Peace Prize for deterring the use of nuclear weapons, not through nuclear power or violence, but through words and by telling their stories. Nuclear deterrence, which intimidates other countries by possessing nuclear weapons, cannot save humanity. We, the hibakusha, will tell young people through our words and by telling our stories. We will also work to raise public opinion while supporting the younger generation's power to communicate and take action. We will also urge domestic and international policymakers to take the leadership in working toward a human society free of nuclear weapons and war. Thank you very much.
Our deep thanks to Masako Wado for her tireless efforts and her powerful testimony today. We would now ask that everyone in the hall and those who are watching on our live stream observe a moment of silence. This moment of silence is in memory of all the victims of nuclear weapons, particularly the nuclear testings, the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but also honoring those who have been affected by the nuclear testing and other aspects of the nuclear weapons industry. We offer our solemn wish to prevent such suffering in the future. So please join us now in this moment of silence. Thank you. Our next speaker is His Eminence Cardinal Silvio Maria Tomasi. For decades, Cardinal Tomasi has been a powerful voice for peace, particularly in the realm of nuclear disarmament. He served as permanent observer of the Holy See to the United Nations from 2003 to 2016, and is currently special delegate of the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. In 2020, the magazine America described Cardinal Tomasi as the leader of the Vatican's fight against nuclear weapons. Please join me in welcoming Cardinal Tomasi.
Good afternoon. I think, first of all, we have to thank the Assembly of the Nobel Peace Prize winners for the idea of returning with their assembly to remind us of the problems connected with the use of atomic weapons. But first of all, the more immediate thanks go to Daniel, who has been a little motor trying to make the program functioning and working out. My task is to say a word on the result of this meeting, of this conference, but not to go into too much detail. The religious aspect of this event may offer some ideas of the complexity of the problems and the difficulty in communicating to everybody the disastrous consequences that the eventual use of even one atomic bomb can create. As a sign of gratitude, I will do my job of reporting to Pope Leo XIV and the thinking and the conclusion of this event. Not only because he's from Chicago, but because he's a good man, very well prepared for the job he has been given by the cardinals, selecting him to be the successor of Pope Francis, who was equally popular Pope. Then it has become the case for Pope Leo. In this spirit, it seems to me that there are some specific ways emerging from the assembly in which religious communities can contribute to the global architecture of disarmament and restraint. First of all, interfaith verification of witness program, to establish a coalition of religious organizations trained to serve as civil society witnesses within arms control verification regimes. While not inspectors in the technical sense, these religious witnesses would accompany UN teams offering moral oversight, promoting transparency, and increasing public trust in disarmament process, especially in difficult regions where states distrust each other but still respect faith leaders in some way. Then faith-based early warning dialogue platforms create regional interreligious confidence-building mechanisms where faith leaders regularly meet with policymakers, scientists, and civil society actors to identify early signs of arms racing, destabilizing doctrines, or doctrinal shifts that can cause negative repercussion. A third aspect that should be pointed out is the Global Interfaith Council as a possibility on technology and peace. Form a standing council composed of representatives from major world religions, ethicists, scientists, and disarmament experts to assess and publish annual reports on the ethical implications of emerging technologies in relation to nuclear stability. Dear friends of peace, as I said this morning, mark this anniversary only with solemn remembrance would be a missed opportunity. Let it also be an act of renewal. The Trinity explosion taught us what we are capable of destroying. The task before us now is to rediscover what we are capable of preserving and building. May this gathering be a milestone, not in remembrance of destruction, but in the awakening of conscience and commitment for peace and for solidarity with the entire human family. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Alexandra Bell, and I'm the President and CEO of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. It is my honor and privilege today to introduce Dr. Robert Floyd, the Executive Secretary of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization. For those who don't know, the CTBTO supports the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, the treaty that bans nuclear explosions by everyone, everywhere, above ground, underwater, and underground. A key part of the global nuclear arms control framework, the CTBT is essential and a component of the international nuclear arms control and disarmament framework. I will also fully admit that this is my favorite treaty. We are grateful to know that this important organization is being run by a consummate scientist and diplomat. Dr. Floyd was the director prior to becoming the executive secretary. Dr. Floyd was the Director General of the Australian Safeguards and Non-Proliferation Office, where he was responsible for Australia's implementation of and compliance with various international treaties and conventions, including the CTBT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Materials, and the Chemical Weapons Convention. Today, he'll reflect on the first nuclear test, which happened 80 years ago today, and reflect on a future, or think about a future, of a world hopefully free of nuclear explosive testing. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Floyd.
Alex, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. It sounds like she wants my job. Her favorite treaty is the CTBT. I love it. But it's a great honor that you've bestowed upon me, Daniel, the organizers, to be able to speak at this very important gathering. And so thank you from the bottom of my heart. Distinguished guests, so many Nobel laureates, friends. Today, I want to talk about limits. Limits. But following our moment of reflection and silent thought, I too want to start at Hiroshima. A city going about its usual business on a bright summer's day. Then, as if from nowhere, firestorms. Tens of thousands of deaths, appalling injuries. I had the somber honor of visiting Hiroshima in August of 2023. Nothing struck me more deeply than staring at a tiny tricycle. It was Shinichi Tetsunani's tricycle. He was just 3 years old, playing on his tricycle in his backyard, over a kilometre away from where the bomb exploded. And then, no more. That terrible day was 80 years ago. But friends, let's go back 3,000 years. I know that's really short time for an astrophysicist, but let's go back 3,000 years, also from Australia. I want to go back to the myths of the ancient Greeks. Prometheus defies the gods. He steals fire for us mortals. Pandora opens a box. Icarus is warned, don't fly so high, but higher and higher he goes. The common theme of these stories, the timeless urge to go beyond the limit of what we might know or what we're allowed to do. Nobel Prize winners, Nobel Prizes, they're awarded to those that do go beyond the limits of what we know. The advancement of science for the betterment of all of humankind. And I want to honour every one of the Nobel laureates in this room. I want to honour them and thank them for their courage, their tenacity, and their amazing contribution. So, what should we take from these Greek myths? Like Prometheus's fire, are there some pursuits that warrant risking unknown consequences? Are there places we shouldn't fly, or boxes best left unopened? The power of those stories stays with us. They go to something deep in the human psyche. We don't like limits. Yet limits can also be used to mitigate unknown consequences. The Manhattan Project faced all sorts of limits, of theory, of practice. It needed the greatest brains to work through all of the unprecedented scientific complexities. Over 24 current and future Nobel Prize winners were associated with the Manhattan Project. Richard Feynman, he was there. He won the Nobel Prize for Physics 20 years later. He captured his deep human striving for knowing more when he said, in order to make progress, one must leave the door of the unknown ajar. 80 years ago today, it's called the gadget. It's hauled to the top of a steel tower, the Trinity Test. The physics Nobel laureate Enrico Fermi is there. He's soon to co-found this great university's Institute of Nuclear Studies, now known as the Enrico Fermi Institute. Fermi proposes a wager that alarms the guards. Would the atmosphere itself catch fire, destroying the planet? Would anyone take the bet? Fortunately, that didn't happen. But when the gadget explodes, nothing like it has been seen in the Earth's 4.5 billion year history. A vast explosion. We've set free energy trapped in the smallest amounts of matter. We've gone beyond the limits of science. Just weeks later, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We've gone beyond the limits of war. Opening the box, stealing the fire, flying too high, for you to judge. Robert Oppenheimer, he knew that other countries would build their own bombs. Right from the outset, he saw the need for organised international cooperation to manage proliferation risks. But when he famously met President Truman in October of 1945, the US president was unconvinced. President Eisenhower saw things differently. 1953, he made his landmark Atoms for Peace speech at the United Nations. This led to the setting up of the International Atomic Energy Agency. It's actually my next-door neighbour in Vienna. The CTBTO, the IAEA are in the same UN complex. The IAEA won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2005. Oppenheimer was right to fear proliferation. In August 1961, the Berlin Wall is built, but in October of the same year, the Soviet Union detonated Tsar Bomba. Tsar Bomba, over 3,000 times more powerful as a bomb than the Hiroshima bomb. 3,000. A year after that, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Around the world, there's anxiety and anger about political brinkmanship and the risk of nuclear war, staring into the precipice of possible nuclear oblivion. Minds get concentrated. If we can yet agree to ban nuclear bombs, if we can't do that, let's at least stop nuclear weapon testing. So a partial test ban treaty is signed in 1963, 1 year later, and it prohibits nuclear test explosions in the atmosphere, in outer space, and underwater. At last, some limits are put in place. Then comes the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, in 1968. A big, bold bargain between states that have nuclear weapons and those that don't. Non-nuclear weapon states agree never to pursue nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapon states agree to pursue nuclear disarmament. And all states are to have access to the peaceful uses of nuclear technology. The NPT negotiators, they couldn't agree a complete ban on testing. They tried. But the preambular text to the NPT spells out the ambition that they still had. It says to seek to achieve the discontinuance of all test explosions of nuclear weapons for all time, and to continue negotiations to that end. Ending all test explosions for all time. The preamble to the NPT, not the CTB, the NPT. Ambition is one thing, but delivering ambition is often something else. And it was 3 decades later. At last, in September of 1996, the international community agrees the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, the CTBT. The CTBTO is set up, the organisation giving effect to that treaty, and I represent it here with you today. Nuclear weapons and the policy issues that they raise, they test our limits. Limits of ethics, limits of science, limits of policy and diplomacy. The CTBTO addresses these subtle and critical issues. And I want to show you why it's been so successful. And to ask this distinguished assembly to use its voice to make this fine treaty even more effective. I won't say much about the limits of ethics. That's a difficult but important topic in each country's domestic policies, at the international level, even in our families. But it's clear, as weapons, nuclear bombs fall into a unique ethical category. They make possible mutually assured destruction. The human species could be wiped out. Today, any state using a nuclear weapon would cross an ethical and a policy threshold, taking world affairs into a period of dark, dangerous unpredictability. That is one Pandora's box that must stay shut. What are the limits of science? A striking example of surpassing scientific limits helped bring about the CTBT itself. It's hard to grasp now how nuclear weapons testing accelerated after Trinity and after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. By the time of the partial test ban treaty in 1963, there'd been 500 tests. Tests in the atmosphere, in the sea, on the land, underground. The partial test ban treaty was largely respected, but underground weapon testing continued at the dizzy rate of roughly 1 test per week from 1968 all the way through to the end of the Cold War. Before the CTBT was signed in 1996, more than 2,000 nuclear weapons tests, many far bigger than the bomb that devastated Hiroshima. After the CTBT is signed, in the nearly 3 decades from 24th of September 1996, when the CTBT was open for signature, through to today, fewer than 12 test events. Fewer than 12. This century, only 1 state has tested nuclear weapons, North Korea. In short, explosive testing has almost stopped. The current record for the longest period between tests anywhere on Earth since Trinity in 1945, the biggest gap, it's over 8 years. It's 3,054 days, and that was between May 1998 and October 2006. Today, it's 2,873 days since the last explosion, the North Korean test, 3rd of September 2017. Friends, we're actually on track to set a fine new record. If we get to the 14th of January next year, that will be the longest gap since the very first test between tests. And that is positive. So the CTBT has been a dramatic success. With each day without a test, then the global norm demonstrates its invaluable contribution to peace and security for all. For most people, nuclear weapon testing now, it's seen as outrageous, it's seen as outlandish. Something casting a shadow on all of humanity. And the norm weighs heavily on all states, those that have signed and ratified the CTBT, but also the very small number that haven't signed and ratified. More on that later. So why did it take so long to agree that comprehensive ban on testing? It comes down to something simple: trust. Or the other side of trust, cheating. The nuclear weapon states could agree to stop testing in the atmosphere, in the ocean, or on the surface of the Earth, because those tests could be easily detected. But how to tell the difference between a secret nuclear test in a remote part of the world and some sort of earth tremor? The answer came from science. Different technologies breaking old limits and opening new possibilities. A global network of sophisticated monitoring devices taking different measurements. Seismic sensors for vibrations in the Earth's crust. Hydroacoustic sensors for vibrations in the ocean. Infrasound sensors for vibrations in the atmosphere. And importantly, radionuclide sensors for radioactive particles and gases in the atmosphere, telltale signs of a test. These devices feed their data to a central point using the latest satellite communication technologies. It all comes in to Vienna. and analysts are using sophisticated software to look for the distinctive patterns created by a nuclear test. The analysts tell us with speed and accuracy where exactly a test might have taken place. We've solved the cheating problem. Testing can't happen without the world knowing. The end of the Cold War creates a context for thinking differently, thinking boldly. By the mid-1990s, science and diplomacy come together to agree to set up a visionary new monitoring system under the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. It's called the International Monitoring System. Over 300 monitoring facilities all around the globe. And data continuously streaming to our International Data Center in Vienna, providing 24/7 coverage of every square kilometre of this planet. Only possible through global partnership, achieved through cost sharing of all states. But friends, the Earth is a noisy place. Earthquakes, landslides, volcanoes, meteors, quarry blasts, plane crashes, explosions in conflict, whale sounds bouncing around the oceans. Our system detects it all. And if you're trying to find a needle in a haystack, you need to look through a lot of hay, right? The point of the treaty is to spot a nuclear test. And actually, sometimes it's vital to be sure that an event is not a nuclear test. In October last year, there were 2 small seismic events detected in northern Iran. Pretty common. Social media speculation, misinformation, disinformation spread like wildfire, saying a nuclear test has been conducted. 43 of our CTBTO International Monitoring System seismic stations detected those seismic events, small as they were. Stations thousands of kilometres away from Mongolia to Canada. We had the unambiguous scientific evidence. But it did take a couple of days to analyse, and because the seismic event was so small, but then we shared our assessment. These events were natural. They were earthquakes, not man-made and certainly not nuclear explosions. The social media noise, the misinformation, it just stopped. And the risk of panicky escalation was averted. It's important to know when it's not a nuclear test. In everything CTBTO does today, the science is not the problem. The IMS has a level of precision well beyond the treaty's expectations. The original design goal for the treaty was to detect a 1 kiloton explosion anywhere on Earth, noting that Hiroshima was 15 kilotons. So to detect 1 kiloton. But today, friends, we can detect down to the level of half a kiloton because the technology has improved. And with the use of AI and machine learning, we'll drive that detection limit down even lower. Here we reach some limits of diplomacy. The treaty prescribes that the CTBTO will do what we will do and how we should do it. It gives us a mandate agreed by the vast majority of the countries of the world. And we work within that mandate to establish the global monitoring system and to share its data with all of our state signatories. Importantly, the data we gather isn't held by us alone. All the state signatories can access it, and they can use it for their own national purposes. This allows amazing new scientific work on environmental issues, on climate change, even on discovering new species of whales in the oceans of the world. In 2004, following the devastating Indian Ocean tsunami, our state signatories agreed that IMS data could be shared with UNESCO-accredited tsunami warning centres all around the world. This now helps save lives. It's part of the incredible value of the CTBT and its global monitoring system. Of course, doing this work requires a high level of scientific sophistication. And one of our initiatives has been a scheme to help small states, the smallest of states, set up their national data centres so they can receive this data and analyse it and work with it, spreading the treaty's benefits fairly and to all. There's no doubt about the biggest diplomatic and policy limit that the CTBTO faces. It's the fact that with all this stunning success, the treaty has not yet entered into force. So what does that mean? When the treaty was negotiated, part of the deal was that it would enter into force only when all of the 44 specifically named states in Annex 2 had ratified the treaty. And that hasn't happened yet. There's 9 to go. And we're working hard to see more and more states sign and ratify the treaty. And the momentum is building. In the last 3 years, 9 states have ratified and 1 has signed on its way to ratification. So as of today, 187 countries have signed the treaty, and that's out of a possible 196 countries. 178 have ratified it. That's a lot. The last few states to sign and ratify: Papua New Guinea, Somalia, Sri Lanka, Solomon Islands, each with their own distinct voice. But we're not there yet. For the treaty to enter into force, we still need 9 specific countries to ratify, including a few big ones: China, the Russian Federation, and the United States of America. Importantly, these 3 have signed the treaty, and they are committed to uphold the treaty's object and purpose. That is important. Yet still the world faces dangerous challenges, the like of which have not been seen for decades. Among so many risks, one risk stands out: that one of the major nuclear weapon possessing states might return to testing. That would be catastrophic. Because if one big possessor state tested again, others will almost certainly follow, and it'll be a cascade of testing. And this is not just about making a deterrence point, but also trying to improve the destructive power of their nuclear weapons. That in turn would likely motivate other states to develop nuclear weapons, and that for the first time, a renewed global nuclear arms race. How close are we to such an appalling situation? Friends, much too close. In recent years, we've seen renewed threats of test. We've even heard threats about the use of nuclear weapons, plus some states accumulating highly enriched uranium for purposes that are difficult to understand. In short, the threat of nuclear disaster is back. Back in a way I hoped that I never again would have seen in my lifetime. So what can we do? Build trust. Reduce uncertainty. Here's one thing that has been done. Last year, I visited for the second time the US's former test site in Nevada. A transparency visit. And my deep thanks to the US for making that possible. It was an opportunity to see firsthand the site and to hear from the experts that work there. And I would greatly welcome the opportunity to visit similar sites in China and the Russian Federation, building transparency, building trust, a demonstrated commitment to building greater stability. That first fateful Trinity test was an astonishing event. It broke through the limits of science. It opened the way to the huge benefits of peaceful uses of nuclear technology. But it created new and even existential questions at the limits of science, at the limits of policymaking and diplomacy, at the limits of ethics and responsibility, at the limits of human nature. How to control all this? Who decides? These two stark questions are still with us 80 years later. Friends, Nobel laureates, policymakers, a world without nuclear testing helps secure a world without nuclear weapons. It will be a powerful message for global confidence if possessor states restate their commitment not to test. But let's make the case for even more than that. Let's make the case loud and clear for the world's biggest nuclear powers taking the bold decision to ratify the CTBT. Now that will be a powerful, positive message to the world. Something the whole world can celebrate. In 80 years from now, will that year's assembly of Nobel laureates be celebrating 160 years of avoiding nuclear war? Or will they be cursing us, their parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, for not doing something? For stealing fire from the gods? For opening the box? For flying far too close to the sun? Limit we can. Limit we must. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. It is great that we have the likes of yourself being prepared to use science to help close Pandora's box, which we opened 80 years ago today, just a little bit. And so thank you very much for your service. We're going to take about a 5-minute break now before we have the formal press conference. And so don't go too far, but we'll rearrange a little bit of people. And so thank you very much for everyone on stage. Welcome again to the University of Chicago and the Nobel Assembly. And it is great again to have so many people here to share what I think will be an important moment, hopefully one that we remember well into the future. I'd like to start by introducing my colleague, David Gross. David is a theoretical physicist who was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2004 with Frank Wilczek and David Pulitzer for their work on quantum chromodynamics and the strong nuclear force. He is active, obviously, in physics, but also in the cause of peace and the prevention of nuclear conflict. He currently serves as the Chancellor's Chair Professor of Theoretical Physics at the Kavli Institute for Theoretical Physics at the University of California, Santa Barbara. David has been a colleague who has led this initiative from the very beginning, and so let's welcome David Gross.
So welcome, everybody. So I want to say a word about what led to this wonderful meeting we have just had here in Chicago. When I was at the Lindau meeting, that's where the Nobel laureates get together in the summer to talk, last year, they reminded us of the 1955 Mainau Declaration, which was initiated by Otto Hahn, who discovered nuclear fission. Werner Heisenberg, one of the pioneers of quantum mechanics, and the head of the German atomic bomb project during World War II, and Max Born of quantum fame. They wrote this document because they say that we see with horror that our science has given mankind the means to destroy itself. And they said, we do not deny that perhaps peace is being preserved precisely by the fear of these weapons. Nevertheless, we think it is a delusion if governments believe that they can avoid war for a long time through the fear of these weapons. So I felt that the time is even more appropriate to make such a declaration in my now almost 70 years later. And with the help of Brian and some of my colleagues, we mobilized all the physics, chemistry Nobel laureates who were there to sign the 2024 My Now Declaration. And what we said in that declaration was, I want to make sure to quote correctly, that in today's fragmented and polarized world, there's a significant probability that either by accident or by deliberate act, these horrible weapons may be used, with a likelihood of the end of human civilization as we know it. And we ended with a call to the leaders of the world and to its citizens. All nations must commit to ensuring that nuclear weapons never be used again. If they are not prepared to do this, they will cease to exist. Well, Brian and I, and then in collaboration with Daniel, whom you here somewhere. There he is. Decided that this needs to be built on. It's one thing to make a declaration like that. It's another thing to make it reality. So we, with the great help of Daniel and the University of Chicago and the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists and the nuclear experts seated here and in the audience whom we recruited to help us to try to expand on this declaration and to offer practical, timely, reality-based suggestions that we could present to the world and its leaders to make the prevention of nuclear war a reality. And we invited them here, together with a collection of Nobel laureates. And we've now spent the last 2.5 days discussing the recommendations that we believe could move our goal forward. Our survival, as we say in the declaration, and that of future generations are at stake. So we are calling on our leaders in the world to consider our suggestions and heed our warnings. And this distinguished panel will outline the recommendations that we are making. Thank you.
David has been a great colleague and very much appreciate his leadership. We are now going to hear from 4 of our distinguished members of the organizing committee who are experts in this field. And we're going to start with Alexandra Bell, President and CEO of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists.
Thank you. I'll just deliver here from the cheap seats, if that's okay. I first want to thank all the people who helped organize this event. I know it was a lot of work for all of us along the way, but do think that we were able to have an incredibly important and timely discussion here and really draw attention to the necessity and urgency of reducing the risk of nuclear war. I also want to thank everybody for their dedication and flexibility. It is very difficult to get very smart people to agree on the same verbiage in a short order. So really appreciate that. 3 of the issue areas that we focused on were strategic stability, missile defense and the weaponization of space, and of those issues, we knew that there was immense ground to cover. First, I think in principle, we all agreed that risk reduction measures and agreements are a global public good, not just good for the nuclear weapon states that are a part of such agreements or nuclear armed states, but a common good for every person on this planet. From there, it was very easy to go to what is fundamentally the biggest problem facing humanity, and that's the fact that the United States and Russia still possess 90% of the world's nuclear weapons, and they are not talking to each other. In February of 2026, we will lose the last strategic arms reduction treaty between the United States and Russia, leaving us in a condition for the first time in a half century without any stability, legally binding stability mechanisms between those two largest nuclear possessors. So it was a relatively easy call for us to make, to insist, in fact, that Russia and the United States immediately enter into negotiations on a successor agreement to the 2010 New START Treaty to maintain the central limits of that treaty in the meantime as negotiations can run long, and then further to finally have a deep and sustained set of discussions, hopefully leading to more legally binding measures about their entire nuclear arsenals. The United States and Russia have yet to control theater-range nuclear weapons or non-deployed nuclear weapons. This is a long overdue conversation and one that we want to see move ahead. We're also fully aware that China is rapidly expanding its nuclear arsenal in opaque fashion. And the last time I checked, there's no asterisks in the NPT Article 6 obligations that says China can get around to talking disarmament when it feels like it. So we called for the immediate commencement of discussions on their growing stockpile. Further called for all nuclear armed states to involve themselves in sustained dialogue on nuclear risk reduction using the functions and mechanisms that already exist on a bilateral and multilateral level, including things like the P5 process. In the news of late, the discussion of missile defense and how missile defenses affect strategic stability was a big part of our conversation. We called for states to acknowledge the interrelationship of offensive and defensive weapon systems and how that interrelationship can affect strategic stability, and then move to forgo massive investments in strategic missile defense. Finally, we did agree that space is a global commons, and as such, the extreme danger posed by the potential placement of nuclear weapons in space is a threat to every man, woman, and child on this planet. So we called for all nations to reaffirm the principles and obligations of the Outer Space Treaty and work to update and adapt that treaty to take into account new and emerging technologies that will affect space security.
Thank you, Alexandra. Next, we have Francesca Giovannini, the Executive Director of the Project on Managing the Atom at the Harvard Kennedy School's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs. Francesca.
Thank you very much, Brian, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for spending some time with us and engage in this important topic. I want to provide the other side of the conversation because while certainly nuclear weapons invite a lot of strategic discussions and big technical jargon, the committee really wanted also to emphasize the humanity dimension. The sense is nuclear weapons are horrific and have caused the greatest harm to humanity, health, the environment, and international peace and security. It's why we call on states to abide by their obligations under international law. We also wanted to remind everyone that it is also a matter of humanity, and we are all connected in making sure that a nuclear war is never, ever fought. And therefore, we focus also in our statement and declaration on two words that I think are really important. The first one is humanity, and the second one is multilateralism. That there is a common responsibility among nations to make sure that the future generations do not bear the brunt of the catastrophic effects of nuclear war. And for that reason, we've actually decided to call on states to abide by their obligations they have taken under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty to fully commit not to proliferate and to fulfill their obligations for nuclear disarmament, and to do so in respect of international law. I want to just point out a couple of other important statements that we make in the declaration, and I want to urge everyone to think about this not as obvious statements. I say often to my students, in a time of crisis, when everything is sliding, just, stopping the slide is good enough. And so, yes, we would like to be way more ambitious, but perhaps today we just try to make sure that we do not harm the institutions that we have built with great efforts. And maintaining these institutions is important. And so the first call for us is, as we commemorate the 80th anniversary of the Trinity Test, that all states reiterate their commitment to a moratorium on nuclear explosive testing and do what is necessary to secure the prompt entry into force of the comprehensive test ban treaty. But we also want to make sure the nuclear weapon states understand their obligation so that when states have to ensure decisions related to the nuclear safety of their arsenal, these decisions are also supported by independent scientific assessment. And finally, we want to call on all nations to publicly fulfill their obligations, both nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament, as spelled out by the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, to condemn proliferation by any state, including allies. And we call also on all states to enhance and expand the political and substantive support to current institutions, multilateral institutions that are doing a terrific job today to help us set the conditions finally to lead for a world free of nuclear weapons. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. Next up, we have Karen Hallberg, a physicist from Argentina who is also the Secretary General of the Pugwash Conferences for Science and World Affairs. Karen.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you also for being here. There have been excellent 2.5 days of deep discussions and reflections on what were the most urgent, actionable calls we should focus on. But we did agree mainly that sooner or later, these weapons, nuclear weapons, have to be destroyed. Humanity has to get rid of nuclear weapons at some point. I will focus on two complementary aspects that have to do with the effects of a nuclear war and on social activities and social pressure on the governments to achieve these goals. We know firsthand, thanks to the struggle, the enormous struggle of the Hibakusha, the survivors of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, like Ms. Masako Wado, about the horrors of a nuclear attack firsthand. We now have, the world, humanity, is subject to the risk of more than 12,000 bombs, many of which are more than 1,000 times more destructive than the bombs launched on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So the risk is really huge. We know also about the grave consequences of the humanitarian consequences of a nuclear war, but we need to know more. We write in our declaration that we call upon all states to increase investments and cooperative efforts to study the environmental, social, military, and economic effects of a nuclear war, including limited and regional scenarios, and to support the upcoming UN Independent Scientific Panel on Nuclear War Effects. Also, understanding that the lack of political will impedes the reduction of nuclear risks, we call, and this is very important, on scientists, academics, civil society, and communities of faith to help create the necessary pressure on global leaders to implement nuclear risk reduction measures. And I would like to finish, as we mentioned in our declaration, I would like to quote Russell Einstein and the other 9 scientists who signed the Russell-Einstein Manifesto in 1955. Remember your humanity and forget the rest. Let's remember our humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And last but not least, we have Scott Sagan, the Carolyn S.G. Monroe Professor of Political Science at Stanford University, who is also the co-director of the Center for International Security and Cooperation. Scott.
Well, let me start just by saying what an honor it was to participate in this meeting and what an intellectual pleasure it was to hear 2.5 days of intense panels, discussions, lectures on a variety of issues related to nuclear risk. I'll discuss very briefly 2 of them and what our conclusions were. First, we're entering a new world of artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies influencing our daily life, but also influencing the nuclear world that we live in. Recognizing that artificial intelligence will be fallible, we call for all states to engage in detailed, intense, cooperative dialogues about the scientific, legal, and military implication of including those technologies in their national security affairs. We also call on all nuclear armed states to ensure meaningful and enhanced human control and oversight over nuclear command and control to increase decision-making timelines for determining the reliability of information and to improve the prudence of any decision on whether to use military force. But we also had lectures on human psychology and decision-making, and therefore acknowledging the fallibility of humans. We also call on all nuclear armed states to institute the 2-person rule to ensure that at least 2 individuals are involved in any decision about the use of nuclear force. We also had a panel on close calls, the history of false warnings, accidents, near accidents, and what this might mean for the future. Accepting that the potential for nuclear accidents and miscalculations will always exist, we call on all nuclear armed states to expand secure communication lines between and among them, and to increase the number and frequency of multilateral dialogues on mechanisms for improved crisis prevention and improved crisis management. For myself, coming out of this intense 2.5 days, I further encouraged my belief that relying on nuclear deterrence for global security is like walking on thin ice. The fact that we've done it for so long should not lead us to believe that we can continue to do it forever. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
So Alex, Francesca, Karen, and Scott, you have been outstanding new colleagues who I've not worked with before. We have been discussing this event by Zoom over horrible time zones. For me, very early in the morning for more than 6 months. And they've been outstanding colleagues. And I really want to thank you being prepared to join David and myself in this endeavor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
So, David.
You want them?
No, they'll stay. We'll come up. Okay. I think we have something to think about.
That's for sure. I think we need to sign the document.
Indeed. So many of our colleagues have had a chance to sign, but David and I have not. And so I look forward, hopefully you will join me here, and I will go first, but I will give you the honor as our grand physicist in the room. to go and be the final. So this is a great honor for me. And I look forward.
So these are so far the signatures of our Nobel laureates. There will be many, many more.
I'm going to grab that. Yeah, we're going to do a picture. And thank you to our colleagues who have joined us from around the world. We now have chances to ask a few questions of our distinguished panel members up here. And so if you have a question, please raise your hand and then tell us who you are. But I'm going to get things going by just getting David talking while we figure out who our first person from the audience will be. So David, you've been doing this longer than I have, but looking at previous efforts like the Mainau Declaration and the Russell-Einstein Manifesto, what can we learn about those things, about keeping momentum going? Because we do things like this, and we don't want it to stop. We need it to lead to change.
Well, unfortunately, one lesson is, by and large, these declarations or petitions don't work very well. Which is sobering, because something has to work. We're in a crisis. We are making suggestions, brilliant suggestions, about how to easily alleviate the danger, the catastrophe of nuclear war to our leaders. But unless the people of the world, the political oomph is there, our leaders are not going to do anything. They haven't been doing anything for years and years. They face each other and internal rivals. It's not easy for them to act wisely. In the past, the advances that have been made, like the Test Ban Treaty or the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaties, were all backed by the fact that millions of people marched in the streets. Why did they march in the street? They were scared. In my opinion, the main motivation for the advances in reducing the risk of Armageddon was the fear of a large number of people throughout the world who demanded from their leaders to act. Currently, I'm absolutely shocked by the fact that, as far as I can see, most people under the age of 40 are not afraid, really. Nuclear weapons, they've heard of it. They know nothing, by and large. Nobody talks about it. Governments are in a conspiratorial mood not to talk about it. They don't want a population that is afraid and makes demands of them. In Mainau, I was motivated by realizing important elections were going on throughout the world, in Germany, in France, in Britain, in the United States, all nuclear powers, and not one politician, either in power or running for power, talked about nuclear war. The reporters didn't talk about nuclear war. It wasn't brought up in the debates. It's astonishing. Our recommendations are great, but without the political will behind them, nothing will happen. So we need two things to focus on now, in addition to a very wise and carefully thought out recommendation, that is information. We must inform the 80% of the world's population that was born after the end of the Cold War and knows nothing about the dangers of nuclear war. Or even the physicists at Lindau, all the young physicists, knew nothing. And we're not worried about it. And that information alone will make people afraid, because that's the reality of the current situation. And that action can lead to the political climate that makes it possible for the leaders of the world to adopt these recommendations. How do we do that? We have no idea. I have no idea. These declarations might have a little effect. What new journalists are beginning to do now, Washington Post and New York Times, might have a little effect, but I'm astonished how little effect this is. We need new ideas to break through the barrier of ignorance and complacency. Otherwise, this will be a failure.
Okay. Thank you, David. Now we have our first question here. Please let us know your name, and then I'll direct it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Audrey Scott. I'm a current student here at the university and former student in Professor Hull's Are We Doomed class. I've also had a distinct past in the aerospace industry, so I was particularly struck by the point that Alexandra Bell, you mentioned in the declaration about the avoidance of the nuclear proliferation in space and this utilization of in-space weapons. Could you speak more on that and the steps that modern scientists who maybe hope to put some of our instruments on satellites might be able to take to not inadvertently contribute to this system of weaponization? I'm reminded of all of the different scientists protesting against these strategic defense initiatives of the Reaganite era, and it's fascinating to think that we're just seem to be retreading this same ground. Thank you.
Alex?
So here I'm going to be in a little bit of danger because I know enough about space security, to make trouble, but wouldn't call myself an expert. But I think fundamentally, the danger that we're seeing of a move towards the weaponization of space, a security condition that we've been trying to avoid, that we put mechanisms in place to avoid, primarily through the Outer Space Treaty and then steps along the way. We don't all agree as nations about how to manage space security. There's been resistance to take positive, practical steps. I think we made a breakthrough a few years ago at the UN First Committee, where we got an overwhelming majority of countries to agree to a ban on direct descent anti-satellite testing. That is a solution to all the problems in space, but it is one step forward that we could get sort of broad global agreement on, and we build from there. I think in terms of the investments that we're going to need people to make, experts around the world in how to verify mechanisms. It's one thing to want legal structures in space. It's another thing to actually have them be verifiable and implementable. So we're going to need lots of young people and people around the world thinking about how to manage those threats. I think we could have probably written an entire dissertation on how space security is going to affect the width and breadth of global security going forward, the same way emerging and disruptive technologies will. But what we wanted to do here in this document was focus on that core structure of the Outer Space Treaty, understanding that no treaty has ever been or will ever be perfect, and that these structures do need to adapt and evolve to be viable with our present security circumstances. So that's where we started. I'll defer to any of my co-panelists if they have any.
I think towards the back, there's someone there. Yep, go. And please tell us your name.
Hi, thanks so much. My name is Josh Keating. I'm a reporter for Vox and an Outrider Fellow. I have a question about the intersection between nuclear proliferation and conventional conflict. In recent weeks, we've seen 2 nuclear-armed states attack another one in order to prevent it from acquiring a nuclear weapon. Putting aside the particulars of that case, I'm wondering if you can comment on, as a general principle, do you feel the use of military force can be justified in order to prevent a country from acquiring a nuclear weapon, in order to prevent further proliferation? Thank you.
This is Scott or Francesca?
Well, I can answer for myself, but certainly not for the group. There's been one new nuclear state emerging every 5 years or so for a long period of time, then a gap, and then North Korea, and then no further states. But there are many states now who have nuclear latency, that is a capability technically to develop nuclear weapons, especially if they get an ability to enrich uranium or produce reprocessed plutonium. So we're in a world where states are looking out and seeing what is happening. And I think we can't estimate the future without having some sense of what's going to happen in Ukraine and what's going to happen with Iran. And regardless of how you feel about the questions about who should be paying for aid to Ukraine, I think the war in Ukraine is also a question about proliferation, because if countries see that Ukraine loses badly and loses its sovereignty because of Russian nuclear threats and because of its giving up nuclear weapons in the past, that will encourage other countries to get nuclear weapons. I also think, regardless of what you think about the attack on Iran or what you think about the end of the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, what happens with Iran in the future? Does it get nuclear weapons, or does this stop their nuclear program? That will determine who gets nuclear weapons in the future in the Middle East. Because if they get nuclear weapons, I think Saudi Arabia will get nuclear weapons. I think Turkey will be interested, and there may be others. So not only are we in a dangerous world with respect to U.S.-China, U.S.-Russia relations today, we're also on the verge of a major, major change in nuclear proliferation, and it could go in either direction depending on what happens in both Iran and in Ukraine.
Right. Francesca, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I think this question, and I want to disclose I'm Italian, so I've been heavily involved in a lot of discussions among European countries. And what Scott is saying is absolutely true. And often when I go to Washington, I say, look, the proliferation discussion in Europe is real. Now, we shouldn't panic, but I think we should also not dismiss it. But there are a few things that I think are important, especially for reporters when they think about proliferation. We tend to make very simplistic statements about proliferation, right? So the idea is if Iran gets the bomb, everyone else in the Middle East, there's going to be a proliferation cascade. Or, for example, the South Koreans want nuclear weapons, right? I just feel like we should be very careful about these statements. There are many, many factors that play into the decision of a country to go down that nuclear path. And I think the international community has shown today the immense cost, if you look at Iran, of trying to at least get close to a nuclear capability. I'm not talking about a bomb, but let's just say a non-peaceful program. So I would say, yes, there are proliferation pressure, but there are also a lot of factors that countries do assess in deciding what to do, right? What I think is very problematic for me is looking from a non-nuclear weapon state today. You are seeing nuclear weapon states that are becoming increasingly predatory, right? What is happening in Ukraine is beyond the pale. You have a nuclear weapon state that has given negative security assurances to a country and is now destroying it, and now is added by another country with nuclear weapons that is not even in the European theater, right? So I'm looking at the lenses through the lenses of non-nuclear weapon states, and I'm thinking to myself, how can I survive in this world without nuclear weapons myself? And so the question we need to answer today is, what is a form of security for everyone that does not rely on nuclear weapons, but it is also credible for all the countries that don't have those huge arsenals? And I'm not sure we are giving a convincing answer. So I am not in panic about nuclear proliferation today. I think there are, again, a lot of considerations, but I also think that we are a little bit like, alienating a large part of the countries that think about this world and feel like, I don't feel safe here.
Karen?
I would like to add something, because I totally agree with both of you, but I think it's very important to consider that the situation in Iran is a pivotal moment, and there has to be a resumption of dialogue trying to reach a mutual agreement between Iran and the US. So this would be fundamental. It wouldn't be good if Iran finally leaves the NPT. This should be avoided. So this is why dialogue is so important, and we're calling for dialogue, for stability, and for confidence building between countries. So an agreement with Iran is really a must if we want to avoid further proliferation.
Great, thank you. All right, we have another question here. Please, your name.
Abigail Watson. I have a couple degrees from the University of Chicago. Until past few years, I've been working for MITRE Corporation. With regard to the space proliferation, I'm curious about the space race and nuclearized space race. And we see increasingly, we have companies that are investing in small nuclear reactors for lunar bases, nuclear propulsion, and we have a history of Operation Morning Light, which had the accident over Canada. Are we getting to a point where it's not just states who need to be involved in non-proliferation, but commercial, businesses, the Microsofts, the space companies?
Can I take? You take the space work. Yeah.
Alex, sounds like you.
Yeah, sorry, but I was furiously writing. I think this is a case where technologies, and again, why we focused in the document, in the declaration about emerging and disruptive technologies, are outpacing our ability to regulate them, to control them, even to understand them. And I think this is the case with space. I think we have models in the broader weapons of mass destruction history of working governments and private industry together, the Chemical Weapons Convention being a prime example of that. But it's not happening fast enough. And I would say, while we weren't able to put everything we wanted in this document, it would have been, like I said, a dissertation. I think making sure that we have the right technical experts working with strategic stability experts, diplomats, lawyers, military officials, we need to make sure we've got a bigger tent to make sure we're accounting for how these new and emerging technologies are going to affect security in general, but certainly in space.
Francesca?
So I wanted to address your point about SMRs. I just came back from a nuclear energy innovation summit in Kigali, Rwanda, which is exactly about SMRs, right? It was about for African countries to think about this new nuclear innovation revolution and see whether this kind of reactors could be more accessible to countries that are unable to put large sum of capital, down first, and whether it is possible to actually invest in this and also build a technological community that is indigenous to these countries. So there is great enthusiasm and great excitement for SMRs in Africa. But I tell you what, it was the most striking to me. Alongside the most obvious companies that have always been in the nuclear business, Rosatom was one of them, and then there was Capco, from Korea. You saw a lot of really small nuclear startups created by nuclear physicists and nuclear engineers that came mostly, I have to say, from the European countries that are quite disillusioned by the decision of many European countries, like Germany, to decommission the nuclear power plants. And they chose to actually invest in this African market that was really very, really prone to investments and innovation. So for me, what was very striking is these kids were coming straight from university. They had incredible ideas, and they reminded me a little bit of the Steve Jobs of the computer science domain. So they were talking about these nuclear startups, which at some point I thought, this is crazy. But I'm sure Steve Jobs looked crazy, 40 years ago. So there is something there. And and I'm finished with this, what is the most exciting to me is that this community is rising up not in the most obvious countries that already have a long tradition, but in countries where maybe there is an ecosystem of innovation, but not the large infrastructure investments. And you are absolutely right. And the key question for us, Grossi was there, for example, was how do we safeguard ultimately all these projects that are now emerging out of university labs that might not have the requirements that we might want. So I think it's happening also in the nuclear energy space, for sure.
All right, we're going to go here, this question, and then there, yes. Your name, please.
Good afternoon. My name is John Letman. I'm a freelance independent journalist based in Hawaii. I write for a number of outlets. Thank you for all the hard work you put into this and all the thought and all the great recommendations. This is all wonderful, and I know that there's a lot of emphasis on getting the word out and raising awareness, especially among the public. I'm curious, first of all, where can the public go to find these recommendations? Where can they actually go and read them? And do you have a plan to put out some sort of a summary or a plain language form of this so that the average person who doesn't know the high-level stuff and the jargon will actually take time and read like 5 key bullet points?
Yeah.
And have you recruited any kind of a celebrity or influencers or other people who are going to really generate a buzz and build momentum? Thank you.
Alex.
So we will be posting the document online. My very capable editor-in-chief at the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists is currently writing right now, and our specialty is making sure that we can to discuss and sort of put out very technical information to a much wider audience. And that's the key here, and David already talked about it. You can have the best ideas in the world, but if you can't sell them, if people don't understand them, they're not going to work. They're not going anywhere. So we're certainly committed to that. I will defer to my colleague from the Nobel organization on celebrities. And in fact, I know we have an event later tonight with just such a feature, and are fully aware that reaching people where they are, engaging broader communities past the scientific community, the nuclear expert community, is a key to advancing these ideas.
Scott, you wanted to add something?
I just wanted to mention that during our discussion of accidents and false warnings, something that came up, which you'd be interested in, is the Hawaii incident from 2018, when, as the audience will recall, an emergency warning operator issued a warning saying that there's an incoming missile, and this is not a drill, this is not a drill. This is not a test. In Hawaii, there were some people who panicked, and other people who did the right thing, which is stay inside. Some people went outside instead, and were trying to see what was going on. But in Washington or in Omaha, the Strategic Command or the NORAD headquarters in Colorado, no one panicked for 3 reasons. Because they had knowledge that there were redundant sensors, and none of the other sensors said that there was anything coming. They had professional people involved, and these people said, oh, we made a mistake, and soon announced that they had made an error. And third, no one really expected an attack to come against Hawaii with one missile bolt out of the blue. Imagine for a minute, and this is something I wish there was more reporting on in Hawaii and elsewhere, that incident had occurred not in Hawaii, but in North Korea. All 3 of the mitigating factors wouldn't have existed. They don't have lots of redundant warning systems, so if one makes a mistake, it's more widely believed. Second, instead of having professionalism, which would require you to announce that you made a mistake, people would worry about being killed for making a mistake, so they wouldn't report it. And lastly, Kim Jong-un did think the United States might be about to attack him because the United States kept saying there'll be fire and fury if you don't stop your current behavior. So for me, at least, one of the ways of publicizing these issues is for reporters and students and others to delve into the details and use imagination to think about all these other aspects of it. You'll be hearing tonight Bob Dylan's Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, which ends with, I'm going to learn the songs well before I start singing. And I think that's what we all need to do.
Oh, David, go ahead.
Just to answer your concern, I and all of us, I think, welcome ideas and influencers and other new ways of breaking through. With, to get information about the current situation, horror stories like we're learning now. I learned here that, I knew about a dozen close calls that brought us close to total extinction. But I learned from Scott that there are roughly 1,000, is that correct?
There are some reports of up to 1,000 incidents and accidents in the world.
How
Yes.
many of you know that there are 1,000 times where we came this close or this close to nuclear war? I mean, so we need to figure out how to convey the information about the current situation and the horrors of imagining what would happen to the population of the world. Any help or new ideas, because old ideas have not worked, that you can provide to this community here of nuclear experts or to the amateurs like us who are trying to, would be helpful.
So if you have Beyonce's cell, let us know. You, sir.
Hi, Davis Winky from USA Today. I do not have Beyonce's cell. I'm also an Outrider fellow, I'll add. My question for the panelists here is, what was the sense of the assembly, at least among you on stage, about the impact that the current U.S. administration may have on the status quo for maintaining non-proliferation regime, for maintaining, a norm of not testing, what with the administration seemingly wanting to recede from the world stage? I think about examples like Thomas Denano, who's currently nominated to be Undersecretary of State for Arms Control, said in a 2023 piece that the U.S. should defund the CTBTO. I also think about one of the seeming prerequisites for a proliferation cascade in East Asia, which would be the cheapening of U.S. security guarantees for the ROK or for Japan. And those are things that potentially appear more realistic now than they have previously. So what dominoes may yet fall under the current administration, and how might that change the game with regard to preventing nuclear war?
All right, I could imagine a 45-minute colloquium on the subject, but Alex, I'm going to go to you first, and we'll try to keep it. We're going to need to wind up relatively soon here.
So I think any prediction about what this particular president will or will not do is probably not worth the effort, because he is, in fact, rather mercurial, as are many world leaders, including Putin. But I do think that the president has made comments repeatedly over the course of his life, acknowledged that nuclear weapons present an existential threat to mankind. I am monitoring closely what the administration is doing in terms of policy, regardless of the rhetoric. And I think that's a key thing to do with any government. Words are important, but the actual actions are even more so. So I think the best thing to do is simply to reiterate, and I think in this declaration made very clear, the need for maintaining a moratorium on explosive nuclear testing, and again, finding a way to finally and fully secure the entry into force of the CTBT is in the global security interest of every nation on this planet. And if they're going in the wrong direction, we'll simply say it louder and to more people and create the kind of pressure we talk about in the document that is necessary. People have agency. People are able to enter this fight that are not nuclear experts, and that's something that we very much need to remind people of, that it is public pressure that again and again has produced progress on nuclear risk reduction, and it's time for people to get activated.
Thank you. We'll take our final question here.
Thank you. My name is Keiichi Nakane from Yomiuri, Japanese newspaper. This question is for Mr. Schmidt and Mr. Gross. What did you think when you heard Miss Masako Wada's video message?
David, would you like to start on reactions to Nihon Hidankyo's message and their representative today?
Well, it's obviously extremely touching to hear the stories of the victims of nuclear war. It brings the realization that what we're talking about is about humans, human life, life of our children, our grandchildren, our future grandchildren, but all of us. If I had one book I would like people to read and be horrified, it's the extremely well documented and scary as hell recent nonfiction by Annie Jacobsen. And if I were to address the world, if we could get everyone to read even a few chapters of that book, which paints a picture of what a realistic scenario of a nuclear war would be, which is as horrifying a nightmare of what the future could bring as remembrances of the past, I think there would be no problem towards moving towards the elimination of nuclear war.
So for me, Masako Wado reminds, as David said, that nuclear war is not just explosions. It's human suffering that lasts decades, probably centuries, as we have heard, and it affects, if it occurs again, the entire world. There are more than 8 billion people on this planet, and it is something that she and her colleagues have tirelessly reminded the 8 billion people of the planet that this affects us all. And so I hope that some of the declaration provides some small steps for moving forward and reducing risk rather than allowing it to increase, and making sure that her reminders never need to be repeated for future events for anyone living on this planet today. So that would be my reaction to it. Thank you. All right, it is, I think, time to bring things to a close. As you can tell, David likes to have the last word, and I am going to give him the last word. So David, allow me to have you conclude our event.
Okay. Of course, I need to thank everyone, but before so, I would like to just tell you the 2 sentences I would make if I was able to address citizens of the world. Please join us in urging, begging, demanding that our leaders work towards preventing the catastrophe of nuclear war. You have nothing to lose and life itself to gain. But now that we're coming to the end of this incredible meeting, you could see, by the way, how fascinating the discussion of how to prevent nuclear war is. It's an amazingly complicated and kind of interesting subject. It's much harder to actually get these very clever and carefully thought out proposals implemented. But the discussion of them is fascinating, as you all have witnessed, and I'm sure you would have found it very exciting to go through what we've been going through for the last 2.5 days. But every good thing must come to an end. Not an end, the end of the beginning. This kind of approach, we hope, is just the beginning, because we want to actually achieve results. But I would like to extend our sincere thanks to everyone, my Nobel Laureate colleagues, the nuclear experts, all of us who came from everywhere around the world to Chicago, to this marvelous building, and where Daniel provided us with the means to discuss, peacefully for 2.5 days and come up finally with a declaration. Not easy. So thank you, Daniel. Thanks for the staff. Thanks for all the colleagues who came from all over the world. And thank you for joining us today.